So this is the first time we're doing this, the video blog, the wine blog for the Wine Spot, and we've got a winemaker with us, so we'll jump right into it and test the waters. I've got David Page, who's a winemaker for Adelshan Vineyards in Oregon. I'll let David talk about the winery in a minute. And his brother Doug is also here, Cleveland connection. Doug is with the CIA. We have the art spot here at the Wine Spot, so I thought it would be neat to get both the brothers here on this video today. So we had an opening last night for Happy Looking, which is the current exhibition at the art spot. You can see some of it behind us, but the partnership with the CIA has been great. So David, welcome back to Cleveland. You've been here all week.
Thank you. Yeah.
And sounds like you've been having a good time. So tell me where you grew up and when you left Cleveland.
We were both originally from Mentor and grew up, went to Mentor High, etc. Doug went to Cleveland Institute of Art. I went off to Ohio State in Columbus. I got a job in a wine shop in Columbus and fell in love with wine and ended up going off to UC Davis to be a winemaker out in California and now Oregon. So I, like a lot of people, leave Ohio State because of alcohol. I just did it for a good reason. What I love about wine was never the big, expressive, oaky stuff that was kind of the trend at the time. I was liking Alsatian whites and you know, what was considered an alternative red at the time, which would be like Merlot, for example. It was really exotic in the 80s. And so if you take
full circle, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So you were always into Alsatian, maybe lighter whites, medium bodied reds.
It's not so much lighter, it's crisper and more vibrant. I love the expressiveness of wines that really burst with fruit. I don't want the thick layer of oak or the heavy-handed layer of extraction or obnoxious level of ripeness. I'm not looking for jamminess. I'm not looking for thick, sweet, syrupy oak. I want these wines to be vibrant, and I'd rather bite into a crisp apple than eat applesauce. And you know, to me, these wines are the crisp apple. And you know, when you have a riper wine that's got a nice dollop of oak in it, that's more the applesauce. That's kind of heavy-handed. And I think these are ultimately much more fun to drink. They complement food better. And lastly, once you get used to the fact that they're not as gigantic as as a more heavy-handed wine is, you actually find yourself realizing it's more complex. Okay. There are more flavors going on here.
So Doug, you talk about wine like your brother does?
Well, it's funny. He mentioned a key word there. That was fun.
Fun.
And as he's saying that, I'm thinking one of the funnest places I've enjoyed having wine with him is not usually after kayaking or up camping in the Georgia Bay. But that's kind of like why we're here, because we were talking before about it's a fun atmosphere, and it's great to enjoy a nice wine in a relaxed and fun way, and still enjoying a good wine. So absolutely.
Well, I know there's a lot of science to winemaking, but I always felt like it was certainly an art also.
That's exactly what attracted me to it. You know, I've been studying a lot of different things, and some things were appealing to me because I could meet them on that sort of nerd scientific level. Other things were appealing to me because they were creative. But it was the first subject I really dove into where the two were inseparable. And that is because I do have the nerdy science side, and without using that, I kind of feel dumbed down, but I wanted it to be a creative thing too. And this never stops challenging both. If you do this purely from a science level, you can make utterly correct and completely uninteresting wine. If you approach this only from the artistic side, you might at least occasionally make fascinating wine. But chances are you're quite often going to make something that really doesn't work at all. And I'm not interested in wines that have an intriguing idea behind them but aren't yummy. You know, the yumminess is supposed to be part of what these wines are.
Yeah, sure.
And so, like this Pinot Gris, if I tried to hit a home run with this wine, I would have stepped all over it. Pinot Gris is a more delicate variety. you want the bright fruit, you want the floral, you want the minerality. And if you're going to get all of that, it's because you're not going to step all over it with barrels or ripeness or anything else. Tiny bit of barrel fermentation in this wine adds a little bit of a dimension of texture, but doesn't get in the way of enjoying the fruit for what it is.
Yeah, that's a really nice, refreshing white wine, bright, crisp acidity. You can imagine sitting out in the backyard after kayaking, pulling this out of a bucket of ice, and it'd be a
Well,
very
usually
refreshing
after
wine.
kayaking it's beer.
Beer,
to be fair. But, just being honest here. And this is especially great having my brother here because I don't have to spit because he's driving.
Perfect. So how did you end up at Adelsheim? Tell us how you got there and anything you want to tell us about the vineyard.
I started working in the wine industry in California after I graduated from UC Davis and worked in Napa Valley at Sterling.
So we don't have to spit. This is right.
This is a little bit about Willamette Valley Chardonnay. I'm not your boss. This is a little bit about Willamette Valley Chardonnay. And I ran the lab at Sterling and did a harvest in Australia, and then I was the assistant winemaker at Jekyll in the Salinas Valley in Monterey County. And then after that, I did that for 4.5 years, and then for another 5 years or so, I ran a tiny little winery called Cloninger, also in the Salinas Valley. And during that time, I was occasionally making these pilgrimages up to Oregon and talking to winemakers up there and tasting wines with them. And I was really enjoying the work they were doing. I knew they were onto something. I knew they knew a lot about Pinot Noir and Pinot Noir clones and how to, how to find different ways of looking at it. And so when I had the opportunity to talk to David Adelsheim in 2001, we got together and found that we had very similar tastes in what really made for a great wine, and that was a wine that had more complexity than an average wine. It was we never ever, as we talked about wine and tasting wine, we never found ourselves attracted to anything that was simply bigger than the previous wine or the next wine. It was always the wine that was more intriguing, and that usually takes place on a somewhat subtler level. There's a little bit of restraint involved in making something really intriguing. And so that was why I was willing to, in fact, wanted to come on board as his winemaker, because it makes things a lot easier when the winemaker and the owner are on the same page about stuff like that.
And you've been there for
I've been almost 13 years.
13 years, so you guys must still see eye to eye, still agree on things. So what do we
Except when he's wrong.
Except we won't tell him.
So this is the Willamette Valley Chardonnay. There's a trend, for the last 10 years there's been kind of a trend in what they call stainless steel Chardonnays and unmilled Chardonnays. I think that makes sense from the standpoint of let's all back off of the sort of extreme level of oak that we were on for so many years with Chardonnay. But 100% stainless steel is really, for Chardonnay, is really kind of more boring than it needs to be also. So what we've worked out is something along the range of 20 to 30 or so percent, typically barrel fermentation. It definitely can add a dimension to the Chardonnay that makes it more interesting than if we did 100% stainless steel. But since most of it is still in stainless steel, we're not stepping all over it with barrel. And we can dial that in year after year based on the intensity of the fruit that year. What's the acid level like? What are the exact flavors like? You can actually hone in on this idea of what style are we trying to make this year, and what is the fruit trying to do. So the fruit's partly telling you what to do, as long as you're willing to pay attention and not fall back on a recipe. So we're sitting here around 30% barrel fermented. It has a lot of lively fruit. It's very, it has that vibrant quality, and it has more complexity than if it were just in stainless, but more brightness than if it were all in barrel.
It is very bright. The fruit definitely comes through. I'm not sure I would have picked up barrel on this. What is it?
It's mostly used oak,
okay.
and at least 2/3 of the wine never saw any oak. So
okay.
there's not the purpose of the oak isn't to make the wine oaky. The purpose of the oak is to round it out a little bit and produce more complicated aromas and flavors and textures in the wine than you would see otherwise.
Great wine. Not gonna make your brother feel too guilty.
Well, he
I'm gonna
has
have one more sip of this one.
to, he has to drive, but I might have to cook tonight, I don't know.
So Doug, you get an endless amount of wine from your brother shipped to you?
No.
Now you're trying to get me in trouble.
No, thanks.
No, tell him he can buy it here.
Yeah, send your friends here.
But when I do get it, it's very good wine. Unfortunately, he has spoiled my palate. I used to enjoy a certain level of wine, and now I can't.
Right. So this wine is the 2012
Caitlin's Reserve Chardonnay.
Okay. So tell us about this wine.
Aside from the fact that it's the Reserve Chardonnay and not the Willamette Valley Chardonnay, you will also notice that it's a 12 and not an 11. And if you really looked into our vintages, you might appreciate that 2011 was one of our coolest vintages in memory, one of our latest vintages in memory. And so the 11 is a bit of a crisper style, the 12 is a little warmer and a little less crisp, but it's still a fruit-driven wine. This is more barrel fermentation. In fact, this is 100% barrel fermentation. Not because we're trying to make it more barrely, but because we think this particular fruit that went into this stands up to that completely and still makes for a fruit-driven wine. It's big and rich, but not just because it was in barrel, but also because this fruit was just that big and flavorful.
In the warm weather. It's nice. You definitely get a little more, maybe it's a little bit of sort of butterscotch or something on the very end, but it's still bright, nice acidity, crisp, but it does have a little more firmness on it, a little more fruit on the back end.
Some minerality and maybe even some kind of real fresh green herbal quality.
Okay.
And it's still tons of fruit in the mouth, and it just feel like you're allowed to go for a little bit more barrel fermentation and make a little bit of a richer wine, but be honest with yourself and only do that when you know you're starting with really special fruit. Don't try to put any old fruit through that, and you'll end up with one of those wines that's just a little flabby and oaky.
And I'm sure you said this, but do you guys source all of the grapes from your vineyards? Do you purchase any grapes from your wines?
Most of our fruit comes from our own vineyards. We grow it, and we do all the farming. There's some fruit that we get from other growers because we just don't have to have a complete monopoly on all of the worthwhile vineyards in the Willamette Valley. And that particular wine, you asked at just the right time, actually, because this particular wine, the biggest component is from Stoller Vineyard. It's not our vineyard.
Okay.
But it happened to have a block of Chardonnay that we just love. And we've been getting the same block for a long time. It makes really stunning Chardonnay where the minerality and the tree fruit shine right through the barrel fermentation. And it's very exciting. And with Pinot Noir, we do the same thing. We grow most of our own fruit, but every now and then someone's got a block that we just love to use in our winemaking. And so
Although that feels like shame.
we're not trying to maintain that we have all the best vineyards in the Willamette Valley. We just have most of them.
There you go. So now we've got the 2011 Pinot Noir.
Willamette Valley Pinot Noir.
Okay. So
As I said before, the 11 is a fairly cool vintage. We're obviously always a cool climate, or maybe not so obvious, but the Willamette Valley is always a cool climate. This being an especially late year, you're going to get somewhat more reserved aromas. You're not going to get a lot of blackberry jam or anything out of this, and that's partly our style too. Though we're just like with the whites. We're not going for some ridiculously extreme expression of this, and quite frequently, by the time you get to that jammy stage of fruitiness, then wine no longer can pull off that slightly herbal, slightly mineral, slightly this, slightly that quality that a really complex wine can do. So that's the first step in showing that gentle hand, is making sure that you don't get greedy about ripeness. And then it's about not getting greedy about extraction and overdoing it there. And lastly, it's getting into the right barrels. And every step of the way, we're tasting and talking about what to do. Whether it's when is it time to press this particular fermenter, would this lot be great fermented this way versus that way. It's always a result of a lot of tasting, always a result of thinking about what's best for that particular wine, and the answers are going to vary from fermenter to fermenter. We'll do up to 180 different fermentations, and we will taste and talk about each one of them as a separate decision-making process. And I'm always happy to change my mind if it tastes different than I expected it to. So, and this is all at the service of trying to make the most complex wine possible. You know, we'll back off if it's time to back off. We'll maybe do a little more if it's time to do a little more. If this particular lot would be great in a certain style of oak, we'll put it in that style of oak. Again, maybe 25% new, not trying to be heavy-handed about it.
We love the wines that come out of the Northwest. I took a trip recently up to Walla Walla, and when we went to the vineyards, I was surprised that a lot of the grapes are actually growing in Oregon for the Walla Walla Valley.
That's the big secret of the Walla Walla appellation, is that it's mainly an Oregon appellation.
So Washington, Walla Walla will talk about it, but they'll really kind of wave the flag. Oregon really doesn't talk about it. Oregon talks about these wines, Pinot Noirs. What is that?
It can't, unfortunately for the Walla Walla appellation, it's going to be second fiddle in Oregon to the Willamette Valley because we simply make more wine in the Willamette Valley and grow more grapes. So it's nothing against Walla Walla. It's not, we're not trying to kind of push them out of the scene. It's just that we have a very large industry in the Willamette Valley, and we can't, you know, we don't. Most people don't tend to grow in both spots.
So it's not really about not wanting to be associated with grapes other than Chardonnay, Pinot Noir.
No, it's only about we're doing our thing, and we've got this region that we think is a great growing region for cool climate varieties. And most people who are growing in the Willamette Valley have really spent their lives focused on that and focused on what's special about the Willamette Valley. The Walla Walla is not far away, but in a sense it's a whole different world, and most people don't decide to specialize in two completely different things at once. Very different from when I worked in Monterey, and there are cool areas and warm areas within maybe half an hour from each other. So this is the 2011 Elizabeth Reserve.
Right. There you go. This one's done great for us, by the way. When we can get it.
Hey, don't look at me on that.
No.
You say great just for you.
We get it when we can, and when we get it, it always sells out. So we'll have to get this wine.
This is the same goal in mind as when we blend up the Willamette Valley. Really, I get to start with the best lots in the cellar, so it's going to be a little more flavorful, a little richer, a little more robust than the Willamette Valley, no question. But the end goal, being the most complex one we can make, is still the same. Again, we know how to make wines bigger. That's actually quite easy. The trick is making a wine that's truly fascinating. So the blending always, we end up spending more time focused on how we're going to make this as fascinating as possible than we actually spend on how we're going to make this more special. We already started with our favorite lots. If it's not special, we kind of suck. But, you know, we get to really dial in something that if there's a way to add just a little extra level of finesse, a little extra level of something that you might not find until you're on the second glass, that's what the blending of Elizabeth Reserve is all about. Okay. And I think that, to me, what I love about these wines that focus on the sense of complexity and are willing to accept a little restraint to get there is I love the idea that sometimes you are finding new things in the second or third glass of this. And that should be what's fun about reaching for the bottle to pour yourself that second glass. You should not just be thinking my glass is empty. I would really love for you to think, man, that's fascinating. What is that kind of cherry that's in there? And is there a rose petal and some minerality? You know, you're still trying to put your finger on it. That's when a really interesting wine is coming along.
So I heard you talking earlier about the different clones, the that you guys incorporate into your wines?
We grow most of the clones that we can find. We grow a wide variety of clones on a wide variety of sites. We have different soils represented, different elevations. Some of the sites are cooler, some are a little warmer. And actually, David Alstein, while he doesn't like to take credit for it very often, he's really responsible for bringing over the so-called Dijon clones of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. So without him instigating those clones coming over from the Dijon research station to the Oregon State University research station, we wouldn't have the diversity of clonal material for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay that we have. And it just helps. To me, there's no magic clone that makes wine better for the most part, but having diversity of clones helps you dial in at each individual site how to make great wine. You know, we have favorite clones, but they change from site to site sometimes. Pomard is the best clone at a couple of our sites. 115 or 667 might be our favorite clone on the other site, etc. And it just helps us appreciate the kind of diversity we have in these sites as well.
It's a beautiful wine. To have about half a minute ago, and still getting a lot of flavor in my mouth. All bright, all very, very fresh. Fantastic wines from Oregon, and I would say come down to the Wine Spot and grab them. Because if you haven't tried them, you're going to want to try all these wines. So I want to thank David Page and his brother Doug for joining us for the very first kickoff video series. We'll see where it goes. But welcome back to Cleveland. Thanks for bringing your wines in. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you for having me.
Next time you're here, we'll do a tasting.
Excellent.
Excellent. Thank you.
Deal.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Dan.